A hideously ugly old dude is sweating bullets, looking absolutely terrified out of his mind as he stammers. Ridiculous. How can this be? I'm sure I executed you. Why are you alive? And standing right in front of him, smirking in the shadows like an absolute boss, is our main guy, Helt Eisenheim, the Grand Sorcerer. But to understand how we got to this glorious revenge moment, we gotta rewind a bit to a massive, sweeping battlefield where the human army is lined up, ready to completely clap their enemies. You've got these intense mage battalions armed to the teeth with snake-headed staffs, and right there in the ranks is Helt, alongside that same ugly old dude, Royal Mage Milton. Milton, rocking a nose bigger than his actual magical talent, proudly announces to the young king of Ingressa that the troops are ready. The king, acting all high and mighty on his horse, casually says, "Good," before screaming at the top of his lungs to fire. And oh boy, they do not hold back. A blinding barrage of magical artillery absolutely obliterates the front lines, and as the Gryphon riders scream to charge, the sheer destructive power leaves the battlefield looking like a desolate, apocalyptic wasteland filled with burning forests and crows picking at the remains of the slaughtered elf army. Fast forward to the royal throne room, and Milton is throwing a massive, cringeworthy victory party for himself. He throws his hands up, screaming, "Yes, a massive victory!" while admitting that the magic explosion technique actually devised by Helt was a flawless success. But of course, Milton is a massive racist, so he just has to add how unbelievably satisfying it was to see the long years scatter like trash. Seeking some brownie points, he turns to the king for validation, asking, "Don't you agree, King of Ingressa?" But here's the hilarious part, the king is barely even paying attention. This absolute clown of a ruler is just lounging on his throne, literally getting spoon-fed grapes by the very elf girls they just conquered. He awkwardly snaps out of his simp trance, stammering, "Oh huh, ahem. Yes, that's right. If the royal mage Milton says so, it must be true. Well done." Meanwhile, Helt is just quietly kneeling on the floor in the foreground, probably realizing right then and there that serving a wildly arrogant boomer mage and a glorified frat boy king might just be the worst career choice in history. Still kneeling respectfully, Helt tries to be the only adult in the room. He thanks them for the praise but drops a reality bomb. His explosive magic is strictly for slaughtering people, and since they just pacified all the neighboring countries, they really don't need it anymore. He pitches a solid, wholesome idea, asking for permission to shift his focus and develop peaceful magic theories instead. But the king? This absolute toddler literally yawns right in his face. Before Helt can even process the disrespect, Milton loses his absolute mind, screaming at Helt for having the audacity to speak directly to the king. But then, you can practically see the malicious gears turning in Milton's giant head. He pauses, realizing Helt actually made a good point. Since the war is over and the elves are wiped out, a guy whose entire resume is just blowing things up is officially useless. Helt looks completely blindsided, stammering and asking what they mean, but instead of an exit interview, he gets a glowing magical chain straight to the chest. Helt coughs up blood, realizing the brutal irony. He's being trapped by the sealing chain's magic, a high-tier military spell he literally invented. Milton is cackling like a Saturday morning cartoon villain, bragging about how the chains strip away both physical movement and magical power. The king is sitting there looking a little squeamish about treating their biggest war hero like a dog, but Milton immediately starts gaslighting him. He whispers that Ingressa is built on magic, and if a guy like Helt were to get recruited by another nation, it would be a total disaster for them. And then comes the ultimate scumbag political move. Milton suggests that framing their greatest hero as a war criminal is the perfect way to cover up all the shady war crimes they committed during the invasion, while simultaneously boosting the king's approval ratings. The dense king's eyes light up like it's the best idea ever, and he jumps up, dramatically pointing his finger and screaming to execute Helt on the spot. Guards swarm in, pinning Helt to the floor with spears as he struggles, completely in denial that this utter nonsense is actually happening. Milton plays judge, jury, and executioner all at once, declaring that war criminals don't get trials. With a disgustingly smug grin, he tells Helt that he should be grateful. Normally they'd hang him or draw and quarter him, but out of mercy, the king is giving him a VIP beheading. Dripping with pure, unadulterated hatred, Helt glares up and promises he will never forgive them. But Milton doesn't even care. casually waving his hand and telling the beefed-up executioner to just chop up Helt's body and feed it to the pigs. And just like that, with a massive splatter of blood, the incredibly rare, generational talent Grand Sorcerer Helt Eisenheim is officially executed, leaving the history books to debate whether he was a tragic hero or the absolute worst war criminal to ever live. Game over, roll the credits, right? Yeah, well, this is a manga, so you already know that's exactly how it was supposed to be. But plot armor has other plans. Cut to a completely different, ruined landscape where a cute elf girl is standing in the middle of a massive, glowing magic circle, looking like she's about to do a desperate 1-0, pull on a premium gacha banner. She starts chanting this super dramatic spell, begging the Holy Grail to reverse the flow of time and remember the great hero engraved in the stars. She reaches out her hand, dramatically yelling, "Hero, take my hand. What I seek is the absolute strongest sorcerer on this planet. Come to me now." She slams her staff down. The magic pulses. A tiny sacred tree sapling starts to sprout, and then immediately just crumbles into pathetic little dust bunnies. Womp womp. The poor girl instantly starts bawling her eyes out, mourning the loss of the last sacred tree and crying about how she thought she was so close to pulling a legendary unit. But before she can even fully process her terrible RNG, the summoning circle starts violently sparking. She gasps in horror as the circle starts sucking the magic right out of her staff, and suddenly, the portal turns into a magical vacuum cleaner, literally dragging her in. She's screaming for her life, yelling, "No, no, no, this is really bad," right before a massive blinding explosion completely nukes the altar. When the dust and rubble finally settle, who comes crawling out of the wreckage but Helt himself? The dude is coughing up a lung, looking completely annoyed as he mutters, "Damn it, what is going on?" In his head, he's complaining that he literally just died and was ready to chill, but suddenly some weird hand grabbed him from the void, and when he tried to pull back, boom, he gets blown up. My guy is just trying to rest in peace, but he stops ranting when he looks over and spots the elf girl sitting in the crater, looking completely deep-fried, traumatized, and dazed, leaving him to just stare at her and drop a very confused, "Huh?" Helt is just standing there amidst the dissipating smoke, looking down at this random elf girl who looks like she just survived a magical nuke, and there's this incredibly long, ridiculously awkward silence between them. She just stares up at him, whispering, "Oh, you," before suddenly leaping into the air like she just pulled a 5-star unit on her first try. She's pumping her fists, crying literal tears of joy, and screaming at the top of her lungs, "Yes! The hero summoning was a huge success. I did it. I actually did it." Meanwhile, Helt is just standing there with the ultimate deadpan expression, sweat dropping and thinking to himself, "What the hell is this situation?" He reaches up to touch the back of his neck, completely freaked out, because he distinctly remembers getting his head chopped off like 5 minutes ago. He's trying to process the glitch in the Matrix, muttering, "I'm sure I died," and then, "Why am I here?" But before he can figure it out, this little elf girl decides she's the absolute boss. She strikes this totally ridiculous, commanding pose, points her finger right at his face, and demands, "Come, my servant. Tell me your great name." Helt gives her the most bombastic side-eye, completely unamused as he retorts, "Huh? Who are you calling a servant?" But for some reason, the summoning magic kicks in, and his mouth moves on its own, automatically hitting her with the coldest, most serious introduction. "I am Helt Eisenheim, the strongest sorcerer." He immediately cringes internally, thinking, "What? Why am I answering her?" But the second he drops his full government name, the entire vibe completely shifts. The elf girl completely freezes up, her eyes going as wide as dinner plates as she stutters. Just a moment. Helt is totally lost, going, "Huh? Wait, what?" She starts intensely analyzing him, taking in his red-streaked hair, his arrogant resting face, and his tone of voice. The gears in her head are spinning at top speed until she points a violently trembling finger at him, sweating bullets, and gasps, "No way, are you?" And right at that exact second, the realization finally clicks for Helt, too. He points right back at her, his eyes wide in shock as he stammers, "Huh? Wait, you?" Cue the dramatic narrator voice, guys. Because sometimes, fate has a really sick sense of humor and brings about the most cruel and bizarre encounters. Just think about the absolute irony of this setup. On one hand, You have a desperate elf girl who wished to rebuild her destroyed homeland, betting everything on summoning a legendary hero as her absolute last hope. And on the other hand, the hero she just desperately pulled from the cosmic gacha pool is a young sorcerer who never even wanted to be a hero in the first place, ended up being branded a war criminal murderer, and was literally just executed by the very humans who blew up her home. Now that is what I call the worst possible matchmaking in isekai history. The staring contest doesn't last long, because the second Iris actually processes who is standing in front of her, she completely loses her mind and goes full Unga Bunga mode. She summons a glowing spear, screams D-E-E-E at the top of her lungs, and violently lunges right at him. Helt is frantically dodging, screaming "No!" as she relentlessly tries to skewer him, crying out that he is the Red Rust Helt Eisenheim and that now is the perfect time to get revenge for her homeland. She's absolutely furious, screaming about how he has the sheer audacity to calmly show his face in front of her after what his army did yesterday. Still playing dodge spear, Helt yells at her to stop trying to stab him, suddenly connecting the dots and realizing that this chaotic little girl is actually Iris Lifshin, the first princess of the fallen elf nation, Freya. But right in the middle of this intense, life-or-death confrontation, Helt looks down at his own hand, notices it's glowing and slightly transparent, and casually realizes, "Whoa, I really am dead, aren't I? I'm so see-through." He tries to tell Iris to calm down because he's literally already a ghost, but she is having absolutely none of it. Panting and heavily annoyed that he keeps darting around, she decides to go all out, charging up her family's ultimate technique, the Elven Leaf Collapse. She thrusts the magical spear forward. But instead of getting obliterated, Helt just completely disrespects her ultimate move by catching the blade barehanded. Iris is flabbergasted, screaming to let her go as she struggles, but Helt just ignores her entirely and goes into full magic nerd mode. While holding the deadly spear of his enemy, he starts calmly analyzing the mana structure, geeking out over how it uses celestial arts and infinite high elf techniques to materialize magic into a physical object. Iris is throwing a tantrum, screaming, "Why are you calmly analyzing it?" Before Helt finally gets annoyed, blasts her back with a shockwave, and scolds her for being so arrogant. But the flex is short-lived, because Helt suddenly realizes his hand has a glowing crest on it. This sneaky elf princess actually managed to place a binding spell on him during the scuffle. He tries to break it, only to realize the magical encryption is insanely complex and impossible to undo. Meanwhile, Iris has completely given up on life. She drops to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably and apologizing to her fallen people. She cries about how she used their absolute last catalyst. The summoning circle is destroyed forever, and she made a massive mistake, because she just wanted to summon the strongest mage on the planet, not the living guy who literally just destroyed her country. But Helt calmly interrupts her pity party. He tells her that she isn't crazy, and her summoning magic actually succeeded flawlessly. He confirms that he did in fact die, though he has no idea how much time has actually passed since his execution. This minor detail causes Iris to completely freak out and scream, "Huh? You're a ghost?" Helt bluntly tells her to shut up, explaining that it's entirely her own fault for setting the summoning parameters to find the strongest mage on the planet. A sinister, incredibly badass aura completely surrounds him as his face shadows over, and he flashes a cocky smirk, telling the princess that the reason he was summoned as her ultimate hero is simple. Because no matter where you look in the entire history of this planet, she will absolutely never find a mage greater than him. Instead of being intimidated by Helt's incredibly badass villain speech, Iris just completely loses it and bursts out laughing right in his face. She starts absolutely roasting him, mocking him for acting so high and mighty when he is literally a translucent dead guy. Helt is just standing there confused, but then the absolute peak humiliation begins. Because Iris still has that binding spell on him, she decides to test her authority by treating the strongest mage in human history like a literal golden retriever. She starts barking commands at him: sit, stay, stand, and finally, lie down and woof. Helt is magically forced to faceplant right into the dirt, screaming at the top of his lungs that he is going to kill her. But Iris just unlocks her inner sadist, giving him this incredibly smug, unhinged look while threatening to treat him like absolute garbage for the rest of his life if he ever talks back to her again. This completely shatters whatever patience Helt had left. He mentally notes that his original post-death plan was to go back and murder the king of Ingressa, but he decides to bump this elf girl right to the top of his hit list instead. He declares that he's going to destroy her and the rest of the long-eared jerks and lunges right at her. What follows is essentially a chaotic Tom and Jerry-style brawl all over the forest, complete with random wildlife just watching them act like total idiots. They eventually just collapse on the ground, completely gassed out, and have this weirdly wholesome moment of mutual respect where they both point out how the other could have easily won if they actually used their full magic, mutually agreeing to call it a draw. Catching his breath, Helt gets down to business and asks the golden question. Why go through the trouble of summoning a hero anyway? What can she possibly achieve all by herself at this point? Iris gets defensive, telling him to stop calling her little girl and use her actual name, though she still petty calls him by his full government name in return. She finally gets serious, explaining that even though he was on the conquering side and probably doesn't care, Lefreya absolutely cannot be allowed to disappear. Even with her forests burned and her people enslaved, which she bitterly reminds him is mostly his fault before stopping herself, she has something she desperately needs to protect. Helt hits her with some tough love, basically telling her that if she cares that much, she needs to stop being so foolish and actually protect it, rather than letting people like him walk all over her nation. He lays it all out, asking if her grand master plan is to use a hero's power to get bloody revenge on Ingressa. Iris admits that revenge is definitely on the menu, but her true goal is total restoration. She wants to bring her country back from the ashes, restore her enslaved people, fix the ruined land, and reclaim their stolen dignity. It's a massive fight to take everything back. Helt hits her with a harsh reality check, warning her that the Ingressa Empire isn't exactly going to just sit back and watch her rebuild a rebel nation from scratch. But Iris simply stands up, gripping her spear with a fierce new look of determination in her eyes, and declares that no matter what the Empire does, she has to do this. Helt stares at Iris for a second before bluntly saying, "This is stupid." Iris immediately snaps back, telling him to shut up because no matter what he thinks, she is going to bare her fangs against her homeland's oppressors. Surprisingly, Helt just smirks and says, "Yeah, is that so? Well, that works out just fine. I've got a little business with them anyway." But before they can bond over their mutual hatred for the Ingressa Empire, a frantic voice screams out, "Lady Iris, please run!" Suddenly, a heavily wounded, dark-skinned warrior elf girl comes crashing out of the bushes, yelling that the enemy has found their hideout. She trips and falls face first, but Helt smoothly catches her. The warrior girl looks up, completely horrified as she recognizes him, stammering, "You are? Ah, Red Rust? Why are you here?" Helt just rolls his eyes, annoyed that his terrible nickname has apparently spread like wildfire, grumbling, "Seriously. I told you I hate that nickname." But there's no time to complain because heavy footsteps echo through the forest. A squad of Ingressa mages suddenly appears from the tree line, looking incredibly smug and creepy as they spot the elf princess. The commander laughs, realizing they actually found elven royalty, and immediately suggests they have a taste before presenting her to the king. Disgusting. Iris glares at them in pure disgust, but the commander just mocks her, bragging that his squad is armed with the absolute latest staffs and magic developed by the great mage Helt Eisenheim himself. He literally laughs in her face, claiming her moldy elven magic doesn't stand a chance against them. And man, the absolute irony is just delicious. Helt facepalms so hard, groaning internally as he realizes he was the one who gave immense magical power to absolute trash like this. He whispers to himself that he's committed countless sins, but arming these scumbags might actually be his greatest one yet. The commander raises his staff, screaming that anyone who isn't an elf must die, and blindly fires off a massive magic bullet burst right at Helt. The Ingressa mages start cackling, boasting that he's been reduced to ashes until the smoke clears. Helt is just standing there completely unscathed, looking deeply disappointed as he brushes some dust off his shoulder. He sighs heavily, lecturing them like a disappointed teacher. "Seriously, no confirmation? No warning? What kind of training did your command give you?" The mages completely lose their minds, screaming that a direct hit should have vaporized him, but Helt just casually informs them that their magic literally doesn't work on him. He takes a step forward, his eyes narrowing menacingly, as he asks, "More importantly, don't you recognize me?" The commander finally takes a closer look, his arrogant grin melting into pure terror as he processes the red hair, the arrogant eyes, the official Ingressa officer uniform, and the Great Mage insignia pinned to his chest. He stumbles back, stammering, "No way. You are Great Mage Helt Eisenheim?" Helt just smirks, his eyes glowing with dangerous intent, as he casually replies, "Finally figured it out, you idiots." But of course, the Ingressa soldiers are completely in denial. The commander immediately starts coping, yelling that this guy has to be a fake because the real Great Mage Helt Eisenheim was publicly executed, with one of the grunts even chiming in to claim he literally saw his severed head. Helt just sighs, sarcastically telling them that if he was going to impersonate a dead guy, he'd at least make the disguise convincing. Getting impatient and annoyed, the commander decides he doesn't care who it is and aggressively orders his men to fire everything they have at once, explicitly stating that as long as the elf princess is breathing at the end of it, it doesn't matter if she loses a few limbs in the crossfire. Hearing this, Helt calmly steps in front of Iris and Ayesha, telling them to get down. Internally, our guy is doing some rapid-fire tactical calculating. He realizes that because of the specific mechanics of the summoning magic Iris used, if she dies, his ghostly existence gets wiped out right along with her. So, ordered or not, he has absolutely no choice but to be her bodyguard. On top of that, he's still stuck with that annoying servitude binding, and since he doesn't have the necessary magical catalyst to break it right now, he comes up with the ultimate gigabrain strategy. He's just going to pretend to cooperate, completely gain the elf girl's trust, and slowly loosen his chains behind her back. With his master plan set, Helt's eye flashes with his signature magic crest. The commander screams at him to die, ordering a full barrage of magic bullets, but when the soldiers violently thrust their staffs forward, absolutely nothing happens. The commander stares at his weapon like a confused boomer who can't figure out the Wi-Fi, completely baffled as to why his magic won't fire. And that's when Helt drops the coldest flex ever. Suddenly, the ground violently erupts, and terrifying, screaming black shadow demons burst forth, completely swarming the Ingressa squad. With a downright demonic grin, Helt mocks them, asking who they think actually created the magic they rely on. He reveals his absolute genius. For every single spell he ever invented and handed over to the military, he secretly built in a devastating counterspell. In the blink of an eye, the shadow monsters vaporize the entire squad into dust, leaving Helt to casually look over his shoulder and mutter, "Told you it wouldn't work." Though I guess you can't hear me anymore. Iris and Aisha are just sitting in the dirt, completely flabbergasted, literally buffering in real time with comical blank stares as they try to process how easily he just wiped out an elite squad. Helt turns back to them, dropping his sarcastic attitude for just a second. The images of that incredibly annoying bratty king and the disgustingly ugly royal mage Milton flash in his mind, fueling his own desire for payback. Flashing a confident smirk, he looks right at the stunned princess and tells her that since he's got his own personal grudge against Ingressa to settle, he'll actually help her out. Whipping his cloak around like an absolute main character, he looks back at Iris and says, "Come on, let's go take back your pride."